Good evening, everyone. Welcome. We're here to have a conversation about justice for Venezuela, a critical issue for Venezuela, present and future. A conversation among many other conversations that we will come between our parliaments. As ambassador of Venezuela to Canada, and on behalf of Venezuelan in Canada, we are pleased to gather together in this webinar Canadian and Venezuelan members of parliament with experts on international justice to have this conversation. We deeply thank the chair of the International Relations Standing Committee from the Canadian House of Commons and the Venezuelan National Assembly, Honorable Michael Levitt and Armando Armas. Distinguished Professor Irving Kotler and Mr. Humberto Prado, Venezuelan Presidency Commissioner from Human Rights. We also thank members of the Diplomatic Corps in Canada, friends of Venezuela, who have played a key role in supporting our interim government. We thank members of Global Affairs Canada for their presence and their sustained support that has been critically important for the Venezuelan government. We finally thank Canadian organizations such as think tanks and civil society organizations for the attendance, as well as a member of a wide range of Venezuelan and Canadian political party members, reflecting our need of a constructive approach to construct the future for Venezuela. The webinar includes 10 minutes per intervention from the panelists, and we're going to have a Q&A with our panelists, questions that have been collected from emails and from the chat window. Bienvenue, nous sommes ici pour avoir une conversation sur la justice pour le Venezuela, une question cruciale pour le présent et pour l'avenir du Venezuela. Une conversation parmi de nombreuses autres conversations qui auront lieu entre nos parlements. En tant qu'ambassadeur de Venezuela au Canada et au nom des Vénézuéliens au Canada, nous sommes heureux de nous réunir dans ce webinaire des parlementaires canadiens et vénézuéliens avec des experts de la justice internationale pour avoir cette conversation. Nous sommes très remerciants vivants des présidents du comité permanent des relations internationales de la Chambre des communes du Canada et de l'Assemblée nationale vénézuélienne, l'honorable Michael Levitt et Armando Armas, le professeur distingué Irving Kotler, et Mr. Humberto Prado, commissionnaire de la présidence vénézuélienne aux droits de l'homme. Nous remercions également les membres des corps diplomatiques au Canada, amis du Venezuela, qui ont joué un rôle clé dans le soutien de notre gouvernement intérimaire. Nous remercions les membres des Affaires mondiales Canada pour les présences et les soutiens, surtout qui étaient d'une importance cruciale pour le gouvernement intérim vénézuélien. Nous remercions enfin des organisations canadiennes telles que les groupes de réflexion de l'organisation de la société civile pour la présence ainsi que les membres d'une large éventail de membres des partis politiques vénézuéliens et canadiens reflétant notre besoin d'une approche constructive pour l'avenir. Le webinaire comprend des interventions de 10 minutes des panélistes. I would like to add a final idea. Venezuela is going through the worst humanitarian, economic, political, and social crisis in the history, registering signs of devastation, financial and social breakdown, poverty, displaced people, misery, and crimes against humanity never seen in our country, in our American continent. Today, a group of expert panelists will not only debate about Venezuela, but they will confirm their solidarity and support to build an alliance that liberates peace, freedom, and justice. Justice that is also prosperity, happiness, and love among Venezuelans. Le Venezuela a traversé les pires crises humanitaires, économiques, politiques et sociales de son histoire, enregistrant des signes de dévastation, d'effondrement financier et social, de pauvreté, de personnes displacées, de misère et de crimes contre l'humanité jamais vus dans notre pays et dans notre continent américain. Aujourd'hui, les groupes de panélistes experts débattront non seulement de Venezuela, mais ils confirmeront leur solidarité, leur soutien pour construire une alliance qui libère le pays. La liberté et la justice qui est soucie aux prospérités, le bonheur, l'amour parmi les Vénézuéliens. Merci beaucoup pour votre bonne volonté, pour votre bonne attente de cet rendez-vous. Mais maintenant, right now, we are going to start with, I'm going to concede the words and the intervention to Mr. Honorable, my good friend, Michael Leville, Member of the Parliament elected by York Centre, Toronto, Ontario, Chair of the Standing Committee for Foreign Affairs of the House of Commons. Honorable Levitt has been a dear champion from human rights and justice and a dear champion from the freedom and restoration of democracy in Venezuela. Michael, please go ahead. Thank you.
Of course, it was bound to happen. No matter how many times I remind myself to unmute, of course, like everyone else, I talk and I'm still on mute. Anyway, it's great to see, even on this Zoom platform, I'm used to doing these sessions with the Venezuelan community in Parliament, on Parliament Hill. So this is a new reality. But Ambassador, thank you so much for bringing us all together, and especially to my fellow parliamentarians from Venezuela. Thank you so much for joining us here this evening on this virtual forum. As Ambassador Vieira Blanco said, my name is Michael Levitt. I'm a Member of Parliament for York Centre and Chair of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. Before that, I chaired the Subcommittee on International Human Rights. There has been no single issue of greater significance that has been discussed more both at the Subcommittee for International Human Rights and the Foreign Affairs Committee over the last number of years than the plight for democracy in Venezuela. At both committees, we've done extensive work looking at Venezuela, including hearing from our embattled counterparts on the Foreign Affairs Commission of the Venezuelan National Assembly, from OAS Secretary General Luis Almagro, from former Venezuelan permanent representative to the UN and President of the Security Council, Diego Aria, and from our host, the Ambassador of Venezuela to Canada, my friend Orlando Vieira Blanco. And thank you, Ambassador, for convening this roundtable and for your work in making sure the Venezuelan people are heard in Canada, and to work in making sure, and also to my counterparts from the National Assembly. Mr. Armas, for your efforts to uphold democracy in the toughest conditions. Every stakeholder we've met with and heard from has told us about the horrendous human rights violations faced by Venezuelans, the basic rights and fundamental freedoms the Maduro regime actively violates every single day. The regime engages in arbitrary imprisonment, torture, and murder of its opponents. It has stacked the judiciary with its cronies and undermined any semblance of constitutional order in Venezuela. And through malicious neglect has hurt ordinary Venezuelans the most. Even before COVID-19 began to spread, Venezuelan children were starving and dying from entirely preventable and treatable diseases. It's incredibly disturbing to hear of ordinary Venezuelans starving, struggling to put enough food on the table to feed their children. With soaring poverty rates and a regime that views food as a reward for loyalty, the regime is directly responsible for causing this crisis to begin and then ignoring the severe consequences. All this has led to a massive exodus of Venezuelans. More than 5 million people, nearly a fifth of Venezuelans, have fled starvation, poverty, and government repression since 2016, forced from their homes in desperation to feed themselves or live in safety. Even if the political crisis is solved tomorrow, The poverty and hunger caused by the Maduro regime will have untold effects on Venezuela's future. It is so, so sad. And COVID has only exacerbated the situation. The Venezuelan regime, unwilling and unable to provide adequate health care, puts more and more people at risk every single day. Venezuela's health system is among the least prepared in the world to cope with this pandemic. Hospitals already suffer from constant blackouts, lack of running water, and chronic shortages of basic supplies. And now they are facing an increasingly worse outbreak, with cases soaring and doctors and nurses dying on the front lines. This is not just a Venezuelan crisis. It has far-reaching repercussions. This is a crisis of conscience, of democracy. It affects us all. The continued solidarity by the Lima Group shows that this is a regional and increasingly a global issue of great importance. I know these concerns are shared by so many of my colleagues in the Canadian Parliament, and particularly by the government and our Minister of Foreign Affairs, who has taken strong leadership positions in addressing this crisis within the Lima Group, as did his predecessor, the Honourable Chrystia Freeland. Whether it's through sanctions against those responsible for undermining Venezuela's democracy and holding Maduro and his cronies to account, or supporting the international panel of experts set up by the OAS to look into whether crimes against humanity have been committed in Venezuela for referral to the ICC, Canada has been and must continue to actively be part of finding a solution to this crisis and holding those responsible accountable. Despite this pressure, we've seen renewed and regular attacks by the Maduro regime against interim President Juan Guaido and the National Assembly's legitimacy. We've seen illegal designation of members of the National Electoral Council through a ruling by the Maduro-controlled Supreme Court, which openly violates the Venezuelan Constitution and undermines the minimum guarantees necessary for any electoral process and a return to democracy in Venezuela. And just 2 weeks ago, we saw the regime's attempt to take over the interim president's political party, removing the party's legitimate leader and replacing him with a hand-picked stooge. There is no democracy in the world where the government gets to choose its opposition. All these are efforts by a regime that knows it is illegitimate and unpopular to circumvent and undermine Venezuelans' democratic rights. At the heart of this crisis is the very real suffering faced by Venezuelans and the fact that their democratic will must be respected. The Venezuelan people must be the ones to lead the return to democracy in Venezuela, as parliamentary elections are called for this year. We know that Maduro will continue to undermine and assault any sense of fair elections in Venezuela. We must remain strongly committed, and we will remain strongly committed to the promotion and protection of democracy and human rights, and must continue to work with our democratic partners in the Americas and with allies around the world to end the suffering in Venezuela and bring a peaceful transition to democracy and the rule of law through free and fair elections. Thank you.
Orlando, mil disculpas, pero estás con el teléfono, estás con el micrófono.
Yes. Michael, I'm suffering the same syndrome that you're suffering sometimes. Thank you very much for your intervention. And I'm so grateful about your support. The idea is to try to keep running and build a big coalition between parliaments around the world in order to try to step down and this suffering that we have in Venezuela. And just want to add a little bit about the Michelle Bachelet report about the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. We have to remark that in the last 6 years, about 20,000 people have been killed by execution in Venezuela. We still have 800 people imprisoned in Venezuela. And during the event, I'm gonna give you some more records about this terrible situation that never happened in our country and in Latin America. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Armando Arma, our deputy, our parliamentarian from Venezuela. He's a lawyer and master from London School of Economics, founder of Voluntad Popular Party, chair of the Standing Committee for Foreign Affairs of the National Assembly. Is your counterpart, Michael. This president of the Venezuelan Foreign Affairs Committee is now who has the word to make his intervention. Go ahead, Armando. Very welcome, and thank you for being here with us.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador. Should we do like I don't know, English, Spanish? What do we do?
English.
Okay.
English,
great.
Please.
So thank you very much, Honorable Michael, Honorable Professor, Master, Mentor. I don't know how to call him, but we do respect him a lot back home. Those who know his trajectory in his work. I'm talking about Honorable Ewing Cutler. We met last time we met in New York, responding to the national annual assembly for the security, the United Nations. I'm sorry, within the parliamentarians of Global Action Committee for the campaign to support the International Criminal Court. And before that, in the hearings at the OAS for the referred to make the referral to the International Criminal Court, I was one of the witnesses because I suffered from attacks and almost I almost got killed 3 years ago. This attack at the parliament, and it has been systematic and constantly to not just me but my family. More than reading some figures and facts that are there in the reports for everyone who wants to see and to read and to grasp, I wanted to give it some sort of a witness to testimony from the front lines. The latest report from Michelle Bachelet pointed out the situation on the border, specifically the Amazonian border with Colombia and Brazil, how these territories are being hijacked or being taken by the ELN, by irregular groups, terrorist groups. I mean, the Ejército Nacional de Liberación, the Liberation Army, National Liberation Army, which is an irregular group, terrorist group, according to the US and the European Union, are there. Some reports show that they are in 12 out of 24 provinces in Venezuela. Some others show that are in 18 out of 24 provinces in Venezuela. I'm talking about the ELN and dissidents from FARC. And they controlled the territories specifically not just for smuggling, the producing of drugs and smuggling of drugs, but also to the mining of gold, what we called the blood gold. It's quite frustrating that everybody who knows that we're like Venezuelans, or we Venezuelans represent the second largest migration crisis because of the political root of a humanitarian crisis. I mean, the humanitarian crisis, as my predecessor brilliantly pointed out, it's a consequence from it has a political root. And the political diagnosis is that for the first time in contemporary history, a an international criminal organization or a transnational criminal organization has taken over a whole state and its capacities. So, we do believe in sharing the values of international legal order and the promotion of the rule of law, and the adding and supporting to the International Criminal Court. But after 20 years and over $2 billion expended in these institutions, I must say that it's quite frustrating not having the results that the international community would have liked. And now with the referral of Venezuela, we're advocating to have more outcomes and more impact. I think when I was in Amazonas, in the Amazonian state in 2016, we witnessed how the Pemon ethnicities, the Pemon ethnicities, told us how there were whole communities being enslaved, and how they make the ELN make them to work as slaves, as like slave labor, mining the golds in the mines of Moyo and Yapacana, which were national parks, protected parks. It was illegal mining there. At their peak, at some points, they would have 15,000 people illegally mining at their peaks, and all of this is being smuggled to specifically to the Emirates, the Arab Emirates, and Arab countries, having some places like Africa, specifically we have detected Uganda as a hub for their commerce. So again, as Ambassador Viela Blanco said, this is, and all the predecessors and my predecessor said, this is a global issue, because money laundering, it's a global issue. Smuggling of blood gold it's a global issue, and it generates networks, and the narco state aims to become, or to make everybody their accomplices. So it is important to say that like these crews use their official posts, and specifically diplomatic posts and the diplomatic luggage and their passports and everything to and the prerogative that it implies to smuggle gold, to smuggle gold and drugs with diplomatic bags, and using all of their prerogatives. So this is very, very important, and it's critical to understand that this is why it is not just a regional but a global. They have embassies in over 100 countries, and also the support of regimes like the Cuban regime, the Iranian regime, and Russian regime at some point, and the Chinese regime. So it's kind of a coalition to support the mafia states. It's a coalition from states and non-state actors. So this is a failed state within the country, within our borders, but they have basically PR agents and apologists with diplomatic passports all over the world. And they live out of drug trafficking and blood gold smuggling and trade. So the ICC, for example, was created to prevent mass atrocities that are already occurring in Venezuela. Another fact, a quick fact, is just a recent report recently showed that about human trafficking. Over 4,000 women have been trafficked to Trinidad. Almost half of them are from Sucre state. And this is, again, it's not just about drugs and smuggling gold and also money laundering. It's a whole criminal, it's a criminal conglomerate that they're using a whole territory and the state's capacity, even though if they're portraying, or we could say that within our borders, it's a failed state. They fail to provide goods and services. What they're willing to do and what they're doing is having criminality as their main objective, and international criminality. So we were there. We're not there anymore, as many of our colleagues have to flee out of the country because of political persecution. But we're still given the fight, lobbying, advocacy, advocating for political change and especially for justice. So this is what we're doing, and we're very, very thankful, and we're very grateful for all of your support, all of the diaspora, the support of the diaspora, the Venezuelan citizens all over the world, the ambassadors of the resistance, as they call them, like Ambassador Vieira Blanco, and also people that we do respect and admire, like Honorable Kotler, and also my predecessor, who are one of our strongest allies. And we wanted to thank Canada for not just for the deferral, but also for receiving and being vocal about our tragedy, which only can be transcended when we effectively start a transitional process after we get rid of the croons and the mafia state. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Armando. Armando is a deputy from the Venezuelan Assembly, president of the Foreign Affairs Committee. And we have to remark that Armando is suffering as well, persecution, and he's in Europe right now. So he's one of the brave deputies from Venezuela struggling from freedom and democracy. Right now, the turn is for my friend and the most famous Irving Kotler. He's a legend alive, former Minister of Justice and General Attorney of Canada, former Member of Parliament and recipient of 11 honorary doctorates. So for sure in Venezuela, we will receive more of them. Dr. Kotler is a champion of the Venezuelan cause for dignity and human rights. Mr. Kotler is a real honor as well for me and for all the Venezuelan people here tonight in this meeting to having you. And please go ahead with your exposition.
Thank you, Orlando, and I'm delighted to participate in this forum seeking justice and accountability for as Armando just mentioned, what is in effect a failed criminal state, but which has a global consequences, and its tentacles are affecting the whole rules-based international order. 3 years ago, the Organization of American States established what they called an independent panel of legal experts. I was one of them, with 2 Latin American judges as well, to look into whether there are reasonable grounds to believe that crimes against humanity were being committed in Venezuela. That's the threshold that the Rome statute of the International Criminal Court establishes for determining whether crimes against humanity are being committed. 2 years ago, after extensive examination of the documentary evidence, the witness testimony, public hearings, and the like, we determined that 7 major crimes against humanity were being committed and had been committed since 2014 in Venezuela, which included, and as I speak they are continuing, multiple murders and extrajudicial executions, thousands of arbitrary arrests and deprivations of liberty, egregious cases of torture. Justice Manuel Robles Ventura, a member of our panel, said these cases of torture were the worst that he had seen in all his 20 years as a member of the judiciary. Number 4, rape and sexual violence, particularly targeting people in detention. 5, forced disappearances. 6, underpinning each of the crimes against humanity, persecution on political grounds, and finally, and my colleague Michael Levitt mentioned this in the most disturbing crime against humanity of all, state-orchestrated humanitarian suffering, the weaponization of food and medicine, where we witnessed hundreds of thousands of preventable diseases and deaths, and more than 5 million Venezuelans have been forced into exile. And so 6 months later, 7 countries, including Canada, made the first ever collective referral to the International Criminal Court of a state party, Venezuela, for these 7 major crimes against humanity. But to date, the International Criminal Court special prosecutors not yet opened an investigation, let alone begun any prosecutorial initiatives. Our report was followed, and reference has been made, so I won't go into it, by investigative reports by the United Nations Commission on Human Rights. And I met with Michelle Bachelet, where we discussed the situation in Venezuela. And in the last month alone, we have witnessed a series of violations that demonstrate that not only have these crimes not abated, but in fact, these major crimes against humanity have intensified. Let me just identify 3 of the more compelling violations that have occurred in the last month alone. The first is a dramatic increase in forced disappearances, the criminalization of dissent and torture of disappeared people in detention. Second, the suspension or cancellation of all the opposition parties, whether we are talking about popular will or justice first or democratic action, making, in a word, any idea of free and fair and open elections in Venezuela simply impossible. And 3, an ongoing assault on the rule of law, on the independence of the judiciary, indeed on democracy itself. And so the question is, what do we do? I say this because while my colleague Michael Levitt correctly observed the importance and compellability of the criminality in Venezuela for Canadians and for the international rules-based order, regrettably, I have to say that the crimes against humanity in Venezuela, all the other assaults that have been referenced so far, have disappeared from international engagement. They are not on the radar screen as a priority for governments and parliaments and civil society as it must be. And so let me just, in a series of one-liners, for reasons of time, just identify a number of specific objectives that we need to undertake. Number 1, to revisit and reaffirm the collective call for an investigative inquiry by the ICC for crimes against humanity by Venezuela. 2, and it has not yet been done, initiate a complaint before the International Court of Justice against Venezuela, which is a state party, for its violations of the Convention Against Torture, to which Venezuela is a state party. If we can't move forward yet on the ICC, we should at least move forward with the International Court of Justice, and that will in fact help support the initiative, re the ICC. Number 3, we need to initiate prosecutions on the basis of universal jurisdictions in respective countries and territories where this escaped criminals are themselves hiding out, or in fact are continuing to conduct themselves with impunity. And I'm delighted that we recently established what we are calling a Venezuelan Accountability Network under the leadership of the former Special Prosecutor of Sierra Leone, David Crane, for that purpose. And we, our Raoul Wallenberg Center, will be cooperating with him, and we hope that this will be an important civil society initiative in that regard. Number 5, we need to invoke the UN special procedures and remedies activities. For example, make representations to the UN Working Group on the Disappeared regarding the growing number of disappeared in Venezuela. And I recently spoke with the chair of the UN Working Group with regard to that. Also, our Raoul Wallenberg Center, in concert with other organizations, is initiating, as we speak and as we meet, an initiative, a special complaint procedure before UN working groups on the independence of the judiciary, on torture and the like, regarding the horrific torture, persecution, and prosecution of Judge Maria Lourdes Afiuni. The Afiuni effect has become well known as having a chilling effect on any independence of the judiciary or the rule of law. And so we are documenting the kind of torture in detention, assault on the rule of law and the independence of the judiciary through the looking glass of the pain and plight of Judge Afiuni's case. Number 6, we need to hold parliamentary hearings in our respective jurisdictions, as we held under the chair of Michael Levitt in Canada, but we need to replicate this as much as we can in various jurisdictions. Number 7, we need to enhance Magnitsky sanctions and combat the culture of impunity. As more countries adopt Magnitsky sanction initiatives, more countries have to implement those sanctions against Venezuelan officials. Number 8, we need to establish an interparliamentary alliance on Venezuela. Recently, we established an interparliamentary alliance on China, which in fact is one of the countries supportive of Venezuela, as has been mentioned. But what we need to do is to bring together, as we've done with the one on China, bring together parliamentarians from the democracies coming together in common cause from Latin America, from North America, from the European Union and beyond, in common cause in order to secure justice and accountability. And I would say we need, along with that, an intergovernmental alliance, an alliance of the community of democracies who will combat the kind of axis of repression where China and Iran and others are joining together with respect to supporting the criminal state in Venezuela. And finally, we need to provide desperately needed humanitarian relief of an independent character to Venezuela's suffering people as we move forward to secure justice for the people of Venezuela and accountability of the human rights violators, starting with the leadership of the Maduro regime. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kotler. Thank you for providing your initiative and your ideas. As you know, for many years, we have been working together, at least in the last 8 years, looking for justice in the International Criminal Court. In the last few years, we just provide to the International Criminal Court many incidents and many reports about what's going on in Venezuela. 450 pages from the panelists who evaluate the situation in Venezuela in the Organization of the American States. This is an important amount of testimony. Just to let you know one more thing. In relation with COVID-19, the Venezuelan regime has implemented some kind of political instrument in order to isolate the Venezuelan people who try to return to Venezuela. This is a very serious situation. We're talking about stigmatization. We're talking about segregation of the Venezuelan people. And this is a new violation of, it is a new crime against humanity that provoked the regime in Venezuela using the COVID-19 as a political instrument to affect Venezuelan people. That's going to be even the new denounce from the Venezuelan Assembly before the International Criminal Court that soon is going to be deposited in such instance, because it's one of the most serious situations that we ever lived in Venezuela with all people. Now, I would like to just to add as one more suggestion, Mr. Kotler. and Mr. Levitt. We need help in order to impulse the referral of 6 countries in the International Criminal Court. In the frame of the alliance, we need to ask kindly to the 6 countries just to impulse the formal investigation against the regime in Venezuela, and even extend the invitation to be a part of this claim, this referral, this remission from the rest of the country, which is a part of the Rome Statute. Now it's my honor as well to present.
Ambassador, just one quick thing. I just want to acknowledge, I see that on the Zoom is also another colleague of mine from the House of Commons, Randy Hoback, is also on the call, and he's also a member of Parliament from the other side of the aisle, from the Conservative Party. Just want to make sure everybody knows that Randy's on the line.
Yes, Randy, very welcome as well. It's true, is part of the Parliament in Canada. Is another ally of Venezuela, Randy Kovac, and we are very proud that you are with us. Maybe at the end of this intervention, it's gonna be my honor to give you a few words to the Venezuelan people as well. Very welcome to come to this meeting, Randy. I appreciate it. Now it's my honor to present the last panelist in this meeting, Humberto Prado. Humberto Prado, Venezuelan, is a lawyer, human rights defender for decades, expert in justice system, currently Presidential Commissioner for Human Rights. Mi querido y apreciado y admirado Humberto va a hablar en español. He's going to speak in Spanish, and we are going to have a translation. So, Humberto, cuando estés conversando, suma unos 2 minutos de tu intervención para que le permitas, por favor, la palabra al traductor. Adelante, Humberto. Very welcome y bienvenido aquí con nosotros.
Bueno, buenas noches. Venezuela son las 7:47 de la noche. Muy amable embajador, señor Butler, y todas las personas que están aquí escuchándonos en este foro, en esta conversación. Agradezco mucho las palabras del señor Irving Cutler, muy amables, por la situación en verdad que tiene nuestro país. Bueno, ¿qué decir de los derechos humanos en nuestro país en los actuales momentos? Creo que la alta comisionada en su último informe, el primero el 4 de julio y el otro el 15 pasado, creo que dejó muy claro en este informe que incluso se metió en el tema del arco minero, una situación muy importante. No sé si voy ahí y dejo como para que vayan traduciendo, Orlando.
Sí, adelante, David, puedes ir traduciendo la parte inicial, por favor, del comisionado.
Orlando, la traducción la voy a hacer yo, la oral.
Adelante, Jessica, por favor.
Okay, gracias, Orlando. Good evening to everyone. It is about 7:45 in Venezuela at this time. Greetings to Honorable Mr. Cutler, Mr. Levitt, and all the members of the Canadian government who are with us tonight. What can we say about human rights in Venezuela right now? The brief that was published by the High Commissioner of Human Rights in the United Nations, both the past brief and the most recent brief have made it abundantly clear that there is a very troubling situation with human rights in Venezuela. And the last brief in particular talks about the situation with the mining arc.
Adelante, Humberto.
Hoy también quiero saludar a Ben Roswell con mucho cariño, que lo estoy viendo.
Un placer verle otra vez, Humberto. Siga con la presentación y su trabajo.
Igualmente te saludo con mucho cariño. Bueno, primero, como segundo, ustedes saben que yo estoy bajo medidas provisionales emitidas por la Corte Interamericana de Derechos Humanos. Hace poco, el pasado 8 de julio, emitieron una resolución, la Corte Interamericana, donde nosotros solicitábamos que extendieran las medidas de protección a toda mi familia, a mis 3 hijos 2 que son abogados, uno que acaba de egresar de la Universidad Católica y el otro de 15 años que está estudiando en el Colegio San Ignacio de Loyola, tercer año, acaba de pasar al tercer año. Y gracias y a mi esposa, Carolina. Entonces ahora toda la familia está bajo medidas provisionales emitidas por la Corte de Protección. Creo que la resolución es importante, lo que emitió la Corte Interamericana, que independientemente que ahora yo esté al frente de la Comisión de Derechos Humanos del gobierno interino, sigo siendo un defensor en mi país en materia de derechos humanos y toda mi familia queda también protegida en esa resolución. Creo que es importante porque da un precedente a todos los defensores de derechos humanos en mi país. En lo que tiene que ver con esta nueva informe de la alta comisionada, nosotros, por lo menos yo lo saludo, la saludo este informe en cuanto a independencia del sistema de justicia y acceso a la justicia del arco minero.
Déjame darle chance a Jessica para que proceda la traducción.
I would like to highlight to our audience today that I am also under siege by the government, by the regime of Maduro. And for this reason, myself and my entire family, we are under protectionary measures that have been extended by the Inter-American Court. My children, my wife, we are all under those protection orders. And I believe that this is an important precedent for our audience to note, because it assures us the ability to continue to champion human rights in Venezuela. Without these protections, we would not be able to continue our work. I would also like to move into speaking about the new brief that the High Commissioner has issued and what it says about the mining arc.
Adelante, Humberto.
Sí, y segundo, yo quiero rechazar y condenar la actitud de la conducta del representante del régimen de facto en mi país, en el Consejo de Derechos Humanos, que rechazó, valga la redundancia, el informe de la alta comisionada y que dejó claro, en evidencia en esa sala, que el régimen en ningún momento tiene la voluntad de implementar ninguna de las recomendaciones que hace la alta comisionada en este informe y el que hizo el año pasado, el 14 del 2019.
I would like to highlight the attitudes, the unfortunate attitude of my counterpart in the regime, who has completely rejected everything that was exposed in the brief issued by the High Commissioner, which indicates that the regime has no will to correct any human rights violations.
Más o menos que para información de todas las personas que están presentes, fíjense, desde julio, desde la cuarentena hasta julio, nosotros hemos por lo menos contabilizado de que hay unas 147 detenciones arbitrarias por parte de la FAES y 30 son trabajadores de la prensa. En cuanto a allanamientos arbitrarios, hay alrededor de unos 288 que han realizado. Adelante, Jessica.
Gracias. Since the beginning of the quarantine in around June and July, we have already calculated around 147 arbitrary detentions by the FAES. Most of these detentions are towards journalists and media personalities.
Hay 288 víctimas en ejecuciones por la FAES y 42 en allanamientos arbitrarios en cuanto a vivienda.
Additionally, there are around 288 executions of the FAES and 44 entries into properties without warrants.
El año pasado fallecieron en los centros carcelarios de mi país 144 reclusos bajo la responsabilidad del régimen.
Last year, 144 prisoners died under the regime's care.
Y en calabozos policiales en centros de detención preventiva murieron otros 149. En total, 253 personas bajo la responsabilidad del régimen.
And an additional 149 persons died in detention centers, making this a total of around 249 deaths under the regime's care.
De estos, en los centros penitenciarios, 66 fueron por situaciones de salud, por tuberculosis, hepatitis, SIDA, y nos ponemos por lo menos a buscar una calificación en este tema, pudiéramos buscar lo que está diciendo la Organización Mundial contra la Tortura, que se tiene que tratar de tratos crueles, degradantes e inhumanos.
A number of the deaths are due to illness, such as tuberculosis and HIV/AIDS. If we were to categorize the cause of death or the circumstances of death around some of these cases, they may be categorized as situations of torture.
Si regresamos a lo que es el informe de la señora Bachelet, ella habla nuevamente de la situación, cómo murió torturado el capitán Acosta Arévalo, bajo tortura. Además, ella habla de que tiene información fidedigna de cómo en la DIJESIN torturan a las personas con descargas eléctricas en genitales, en los párpados, y además envuelven la cabeza de las personas en bolsas plásticas y le echan aerosol y la emergen en agua para ahogarlos.
If we go back to the brief published by the High Commissioner of the United Nations, I would also like to highlight her description of the death of Captain Arevalo. Additionally, in the brief, she also describes in great detail the types of torture that the regime is doing towards prisoners, which ranges from putting plastic bags around their heads to issuing electric shocks to their eyelids and also genital areas.
Esto no lo está diciendo Humberto Prado, comisionado de Derechos Humanos, no lo está diciendo el presidente Juan Guaidó, lo está diciendo la alta comisionada de las Naciones Unidas, que es la máxima representante en derechos humanos en el universo de la Organización de Naciones Unidas en materia de derechos humanos.
These claims are not being made by myself, Humberto Prado, personally, or our president, Juan Guaidó. These claims are being made directly by the High Commissioner of the United Nations, which is the maximum authority on human rights issues in our world today.
Además, habla del tema del arco minero, de la explotación que hay y de los grupos irregulares. En este punto en que hablan, en donde hay explotación laboral y violencia que sufren los niños, que incluso alcanza a las comunidades indígenas que trabajan en las minas de oro en manos de estos grupos criminales en Venezuela, dejando claro que hay o incapacidad de parte del régimen para poner orden o una gran complicidad para no poder, porque no controlan en ningún momento los grupos irregulares en cuanto a lo que se mantiene en este punto del sur de nuestro país. Aquí quiero explicar bien esto de lo que es el traslado de la figura del pranato al arco minero. Y es un traslado que viene desde las cárceles al arco minero, en manos precisamente en convivencia con del régimen, y que en ningún momento se pone orden, sino que se ve desplazado totalmente la población indígena que conviven en este sector del sur del Orinoco.
The High Commissioner's brief also goes into great detail on the current situation in the mining arc in Venezuela, which is towards the south, towards the Amazon basin. The brief highlights the irregular situation with governance in the area, where gangs and also irregular groups have authority over the mining arc, and it begs the question of whether or not the regime is controlling the area or potentially even in complicity with some of the irregular groups. There is some evidence that seems to point towards dons and mob officials who directly from their jails are able to also conduct activity in the mining arc.
Llama mucho la atención en este informe que también se habla de la creación de una brigada especial encargada para la protección y seguridad del arco minero. Ahora, una brigada como especial, una brigada como el FAES, como el CONAS, como la DIGESIN. Aquí hay que tener mucho cuidado y hay que estar ojo visor también con este punto que hace ver la alta comisionada, de manera de estar pendiente de cuál es esa creación de esa brigada especial.
The High Commissioner's report also highlights the creation of a brigade that would seek to protect the mining arc by the regime. The details on the brigade are not clear, and it is not clear whether or not the regime's brigade is like the FIAS or like the DGCIM. There are a lot of questions about what this brigade is like.
A nosotros nos preocupa muchísimo que designen tribunales de terrorismo a través de un memorándum, a través de un procedimiento administrativo y no a través de una ley. E incluso usted ve que han procesado en estos tribunales civiles totalmente que no guardan ni siquiera el derecho a la defensa de las personas cuando son presentadas. Hasta el momento llevan a las personas a estos tribunales y ni siquiera dejan que estén representados por sus abogados de confianza y muchas veces le designan abogados públicos de parte del propio régimen.
The regime terrorizes citizens through the use of irregular cases and irregular court cases brought against individuals. In particular, in a civil instance, it is not clear whether or not a person has a right to a defense when the regime brings a case against the individual.
Creo que otro punto muy importante tiene que ver con la designación por parte del Tribunal Supremo de Justicia del Consejo Nacional Electoral, que le corresponde a la legítima asamblea. Y cuando vemos las personas que son designadas, imagínense, hay una magistrada que es responsable precisamente de sacar una sentencia de desacato contra la asamblea, pero además es la misma persona que sacó una sentencia contra los 3 diputados indígenas, desde ese momento que comenzaba precisamente para quitarle la mayoría absoluta a la Asamblea Nacional. Bueno, esta es la que designaron como presidenta del Consejo Nacional Electoral.
Another troubling human rights situation is related to the recent designation of the president of the National Electoral Council, who was directly designated by the regime's Supreme Court. It happens that this recent designated president of the National Electoral Council, appointed by the regime, has also pastly violated the rights of high-profile individuals of society that belong to key indigenous groups.
Ahora bien, ¿qué por lo menos lo que tiene que ver como defensores de derechos humanos, ¿qué podemos hacer con este informe tan importante de la alta comisionada de las Naciones Unidas? Yo creo que una de las cosas es que tenemos que impulsar a que la alta comisionada colabore con la Misión Internacional Independiente de Determinación de los Hechos sobre Venezuela para que este grueso de la investigación que ellos hicieron en nuestro país, en el sitio, con todos sus oficiales, para que el resultado, no solamente del informe que acaba de sacar, sino el grueso con la información de tortura, de detenciones arbitrarias, de desapariciones forzadas de personas, de la situación de los periodistas, de lo que es la falta de independencia del Poder Judicial. Eso precisamente vaya a manos de esta misión internacional independiente de determinación de los hechos para que contribuya de lo que ellos le van a entregar ahora en el mes de septiembre al Consejo de Derechos Humanos de las Naciones Unidas, y esto se pueda convertir en unos elementos muy importantes para la Corte Penal Internacional.
And so this all begs the question of what can us human rights defenders in Venezuela do to further the cause? The High Commissioner's report is extensive, both what she recently published in September, but also all the work that she did 2 years ago when she published her brief. And one idea would be the creation of an independent investigative council that would look at the entire file and look at all the torture claims and abuse claims and execute and designate some clear follow-up on how the entire file is going to be looked at.
En relación a esta fact-finding mission, nosotros estamos levantando un documento que podemos como intercambiarlo para fortalecerlo, para que vaya precisamente a esta instancia y tenga el efecto que estamos buscando nosotros en cuanto a la situación de violaciones de derechos humanos en nuestro país, en vista de que ya tenemos todos los elementos, tenemos todos los informes de la alta comisionada, tenemos el informe de la Comisión Interamericana de Derechos Humanos que realizó la visita in loco, que no pudo entrar a nuestro país y la tuvo que hacer desde la frontera colombo-venezolana, y desde allí pudo entrevistar víctimas, pudo entrevistar personas torturadas, pudo hacer varias audiencias en cuanto al tema virtual hacia nuestro país. Y yo creo que entre todos estos elementos que ya tenemos en la mano, que son organismos internacionales en materia de derechos humanos, creo que podamos tener un elemento muy fuerte, muy importante para ponerlo en el sitio que debe ser, y para nosotros debemos tener la mirada fijada en lo que es la fact-finding mission y este Consejo de Derechos Humanos, y además de ello, en la Corte Penal Internacional.
So our group is currently working on a document that seeks to further and work upon what the High Commissioner of the United Nations has done in her work. I do believe that now we have all the elements that are necessary to bring a complete case against the regime. We have a great amount of testimony from the commissioner's files, and also even testimonies that were collected at the border of Venezuela and Colombia by persons who were not allowed into Venezuela by the regime. And now we do have the complete set of information that would allow us to go back to the International Court of Justice.
Ya, como dije anteriormente, creo que están todos los elementos en la mano.
As I said previously, I do believe that now we have all of the elements in hand.
Ahora tenemos que dar una respuesta muy importante a las víctimas que están en nuestro país precisamente ahora, esperando todos estos organismos internacionales que han dicho en Venezuela se viola derechos humanos, se desaparecen a las personas, se detienen arbitrariamente, torturan a las personas, lo dicen los organismos internacionales. Ya las víctimas lo que están es esperando justicia, justicia. Y eso es precisamente lo que yo le intentaría hacer llegar a través, humildemente, de mi persona, a todas las personas que me están oyendo y que pertenecen a diferentes organismos internacionales o a diferentes países del mundo. Justicia, eso es lo que espera Venezuela. Y esa es la mejor respuesta que puede venir desde afuera hacia adentro ahora. Muchas gracias y agradecido, Orlando, por la oportunidad y a todos ustedes por escucharme.
So now it is time for the victims in Venezuela to find justice and to be able to get some justice. We have all of the elements, and all of the international organizations outside of Venezuela have clearly stated that human rights violations are taking place in Venezuela, arbitrary detentions, torture, many other human rights violations are taking place. So the best and the greatest help that we need right now in Venezuela is for those agencies outside of Venezuela to help us regain our justice and bring justice back to these victims in Venezuela who are patiently waiting for those international agencies to help us bring justice back.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Humberto. Excellent exposition about what's going on in Venezuela. In this moment, I would like to just to remark and underline the exposition of Mr. Kotler. Your 10 measures suggesting they are very solid and very important for keep going and trying to move forward with this so difficult challenge to looking for justice. I know that you have to go. Michael, I know that you have to go as well. Thank you very much for attending this meeting, and I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes, 1 minute for Mr. Kotler and Levitt to say goodbye and the last words.
Yeah, thank you, Orlando. I just want to say that I was the beneficiary of the excellent presentations this evening. You brought together a very inspiring group. I look forward to our continuing to work together in common cause, and let us hope that in working together at the end of the day, and let it not be too long, because we have to appreciate the urgency of the situation, we will bring justice for the victims and accountability for the violators. So thank you very much for convening us, and we will go back to the trenches now and continue our work to secure justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kotler. Michael.
Sure. Let me, I just want to end with one note. In 2016, one of the very first hearings we had at the Subcommittee for International Human Rights, a committee which is defined by its cooperation and collaboration and its consensus approach, we had a visit from 5 members of the National Assembly, 5 members that were coming to see us, and then they were going to Washington, D.C. And we heard that testimony. We heard the gut-wrenching testimony of the repression they were facing, the violence, the threats, and this is 2016, maybe February. It was a cold winter's day, and we all sat there absolutely riveted by the horror of what we were hearing. And those Venezuelans, those brave Venezuelan representatives left Ottawa, flew to Washington, D.C., where they testified before Congress. And then they went back to Venezuela. And about 3 weeks later, I got a notice from Venezuela, an email, and it told me that several members that had come to speak to us and then gone to speak to representatives in Congress had been arrested and had been beaten. And there was a picture of one of those representatives, bruised and beaten. And they were beaten because they dared to share their story with Canadian Parliament and Congress in the United States. And from that moment on, not just I, but all my colleagues from every party on that Human Rights Subcommittee, we knew that this issue had become personal, had become something that we would need to continue advocating for in Canadian Parliament. and we've done that. We've had more representatives come up. We hear from civil society. We hear from the Venezuelan community in Canada. And I can tell you it's something that is going to remain a priority, not just for me, but for so many of my colleagues. And it's because of how personal this became for us that democratically elected representatives would go home and be tortured and beaten for sharing their stories. Their stories will always remain. They'll remain with us in Canada, and we will continue to stand with the people of Venezuela. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Honorable Michael Levitt. One point is important just to conclude with your intervention. We need to make visible the situation of Venezuela to the Canadian. We know that in the parliament, we receive a lot of support. We receive a lot of help from Canada government, from NGOs, but we need to extend the situation of Venezuelan people to the Canadian people. And that is an important role that the coalition that we try to build throughout this triangle initiative is important as well, to make visible this horrendous violation of human rights in Venezuela. Thank you, Mr. Kotler. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Michael, for your support.
Thank you.
You're a new Venezuelan as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good night.
And now I would like just to start with the question and answer. Before, I would like to extend my best greetings and bienvenue, welcome to Philippe Laurence. Philippe Laurence is a conservator, parliamentary of Canada. I would like to make my welcome as well to my colleague, Fabiola Sabarce, Ambassador, Venezuelan Ambassador to Panama, Claudio Sandoval, Venezuelan Ambassador to Honduras, Maria Teresa Velandria, our beautiful ambassador from Venezuela to Brazil, and Maria Ponte, our ambassador in Belgium. As well, I would like to express my very welcome to Mr. Randy Hovack. As well, Cheryl, of course, Cheryl Urban, you are one of the best in foreign affairs, and Michael Grant, the big boss, who helped Venezuela anytime that he has opportunity. Now, I would like to invite you, and of course, excuse me, the wonderful representation of the diplomatic representation of Colombia, Mónica Beltrán, the representation of Chile as well, Mauricio, Ambassador Alejandro Mauricio, my good friend as well, Ambassador from Costa Rica, Mauricio Ortiz, and now to extend the possibility to exchange some impression to give you the word, to speak with the panelists and to open your opportunity to make some questions. Just to start with Ben Russell. Ben is one of the best allied in Canada. He used to be ambassador, Canadian ambassador to Venezuela. For sure, you have the opportunity. Milos Alcalay as well is one of the ex-ambassador representatives in United Nations. Milos, thank you to be here. And of course, if you want to talk and give some questions, we are going to give you the right to speak with us. And last but not least, because I am saying my extension to Antonio Marval. Antonio Marval is the president of the legitimate Supreme Court of Venezuela. Antonio, thank you for being here, and it's an honor as well to attend our meeting. Please, Ben, go ahead with your question.
Muchísimas gracias, embajador. Es un honor hablar con los representantes de los dos parlamentos en una discusión tan importante y urgente, dado la crisis que está subiendo el pueblo venezolano. Me gustaría dar felicidades a Humberto Prado, mi amigo de muchos años, de tantos años en Caracas, un defensor de derechos humanos de una importancia histórica, por el informe que ha presentado Michelle Bachelet y a nosotros esta noche. El trabajo que hace Humberto y los demás defensores de los derechos humanos en el territorio venezolano es una contribución muy importante al debate internacional, diplomático y político. Y me da mucha alegría sabiendo que está continuando este esfuerzo. Es muy importante que siga haciéndolo en el territorio venezolano. Hay muchos valientes defensores de derechos humanos que lo hacen desde muchísimo tiempo. Además, creo que una de las fuerzas del movimiento democrático venezolano es justamente el hecho de que todavía trabaja en el territorio venezolano a pesar de todas las amenazas y las dificultades, representado como con el ataque contra el diputado Armas y las amenazas contra Humberto y su familia. No quiero que ustedes tengan la impresión que no valoramos la valentía de lo que ustedes hacen. Lo que yo quisiera subrayar es la importancia de la presencia en el territorio venezolano, la credibilidad y la legitimidad que brinda a su trabajo en el contexto de la política internacional. Una de las razones por la cual tantos países se han juntado al movimiento democrático con el reconocimiento de Juan Guaidó como presidente interino es justamente porque hay una institución democrática elegida presente en el territorio. Hay muchos movimientos democráticos en muchas dictaduras en todo el mundo, pero lo que destaca el de Venezuela es esta presencia. Lo subrayo porque creo que con las elecciones parlamentarias que vienen en diciembre y la certeza con la cual serán fraudulentas, gracias al control que tiene Maduro en el Consejo Electoral Nacional, me imagino que hay un debate estratégico dentro del movimiento democrático. ¿Qué hacemos después de estas elecciones? Y quisiera subrayarle la importancia de mantener una presencia dentro del país. Es importante para el apoyo que nosotros fuera del país podemos brindar. Así que gracias por su valentía, gracias por su contribución y gracias por la posibilidad de participar con ustedes esta noche.
Muchas gracias, Ben, también por tu participación. Quiero también extender saludos a los diputados Carlos Bastardo, al diputado Juan García, del Grupo 16 de Julio, también parlamentarios de la Asamblea Nacional de Venezuela. Está con nosotros también Manuel Avendaño. Manuel, thank you for hearing the representation of the President Juan Guaidó right now, even though we are represent of the President Juan Guaidó as well. And now I would like to extend the possibility, the right of give us his answer and some questions to Cheryl. Cheryl, I don't know if you have some question, and I'm sorry not to give you as a lady, the first time. Please go ahead.
Thanks very much. Well, maybe I'll just say a few things, because first of all, Ambassador Vera Blanco, I'd like to thank you for organizing this. I've been truly impressed with the level of the conversation and with what I've learned. At the same time, I have to say that actually I find the accounts, many of them very disturbing and very upsetting to hear. But it just makes it all the more important that this is I want to underline that this continues to be a very important foreign policy priority for the government of Canada. I myself have been working within our ministry for 3 years, and through that journey, There have been many things that we have done with our partners, with our important partners, in order to address the crisis. And a lot of that is working with our partners in the Lima Group and the Lima Group countries. It was a real treat to be able to hear Erwin Kotler today. And I was very excited because there were a few moments that stick out for me over the past 3 years where we felt like we really made an accomplishment. And that referral to the ICC was very important. And I'm very grateful to Erwin Kotler for his leadership in that regard. He really helped us along that path. The other is that Canada, I'm very pleased to see that after the recent pledging conference about Venezuela, that Canada had agreed that we would continue on and lead on follow-up to that pledging conference, so that Canada is still positioning itself as a leader, making sure that the international community does not forget the plight of Venezuelan migrants and the plight of what's happening within Venezuela, because it's very concerning, and especially in times of COVID. We've continued to put a push politically so that we've had four rounds of individual sanctions. It's been against 112 people. And the part that sticks out to be the most as well is other key accomplishments. We were able to recognize interim President Guaido. I remember in February in Ottawa, we all came together, and Ambassador Vera Blanco, it wasn't too long after that we recognized you as Guaido's ambassador to Canada, and it's been a pleasure working with you. So I would say that more than ever now, and listening to everything that everybody has said tonight, we're not going to lessen our focus on this. We're going to continue. More than ever, we need to continue to address this so we can restore democracy, so we can restore human rights within Venezuela, and human dignity at the same time. We need to do so by coming together as an international community. Canada will continue to forge and pave that way as well with our Lima Group partners and with others in the international community. And I really appreciate the opportunity to just say a couple of words, because I wanted to express how important this is to the government of Canada and how much it will continue to be very important to us. So thank you very much, all of you. And I'd like to say I see a lot of familiar faces. It's wonderful to see all of them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. I appreciate it. And now I would like to give the word to Mr. Lawrence. He's an MP, conservative, and he has to go. So please go ahead, Mr. Lawrence. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'd echo a lot of the words of my colleagues who are a part of a different party, but I can say that we are all united in the cause of Venezuela. And I would also just like to extend that I believe that we are all really brothers and sisters, and it's not really for Canadians to stand up on a high horse and to talk down. I think we are all brothers and sisters in the cause of freedom, liberty, and justice. All nations are merely a step away, one terrible leader away from falling into the terrible path of corruption, of socialism. And I look forward to continuing our path together to bring back a free and democratic Venezuela. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. and Honorable Philip Lawrence. And now we almost done. Alvaro, I don't know if Mr. Randy Hovak is still here with us.
Unfortunately, he had to leave, so you can round up with the questions and answers the questions that were made and you have in your hand.
Okay, that's fine. I would like to ask if anyone from the diplomatic corps present in this meeting would like to express any kind of intervention on the question. Please go ahead. Monica, go ahead, please.
Monica.
Thank you very much. I also had some troubles with the mic. No, thank you very much, His Excellency Vera Blanco and the honorable parliamentarians for this invitation. For us, all the subjects related to Venezuela and the people of Venezuela are of the highest importance, because we are talking about our brothers and sisters. So we need to keep on working together for the return to democracy and freedom. Exactly 20 years ago, I was posted for the first time. My first diplomatic posting was in Venezuela. I had the honor to be in your beautiful country in Puerto Ordaz. After that, I was the consul in Barquisimeto and then in Barinas. And people of Venezuela was already fighting for freedom. So on a personal level, this topic is absolutely close to my heart. I just wanted to mention that Colombia will continue to support the 4 pillars promoted by President Juan Guaidó: an end to usurpation, the transitional government with broad and democratic participation, the activation of a reconstruction plan, and the calling of free elections. My country also rejects categorically the statements that have been made by the illegitimate regime of Nicolás Maduro, trying to blame our country for alleged acts of destabilization, which rather constitute attempts to divert attention from the real problems that Venezuela is experiencing through the creation of external distractors in moments of a big internal crisis. For my country, and for the government of President Iván Duque, no solution in Venezuela can be viable while Nicolás Maduro is still present. We need to find a way out for him so we can start the transition. Things have lasted longer than we all expected, and perhaps longer than we all want. For Colombia, it's not only an honor to work along with the legitimate government of Venezuela, but it's also a moral duty, because again, we are sister nations. We are the same people. In Colombia, we will always stand firmly along Venezuela and Venezuelans. So His Excellency, thank you for having us here today, and please always count with your sisters and brothers in Colombia.
Thank you, Monica. You know that you touched a little bit my heart, because I have to say thank you for Colombia as well. In the last few months, the residents, the Colombian residents in Ottawa, has been my resident as well. So thank you very much for your warm support. Now, I just want to extend another welcome to a legend. He's a legend. The name is Walter Marquez. He's an eternal fighter from Venezuela. Dear Walter, thank you to be here tonight with us. He's one of our very big fighter in the International Criminal Court. And Milos, this room is prohibited to smoke, please. So, but in any case, now it's an exception. Go ahead with your question and reflection, please. Abre el micrófono, por favor, Álvaro, al embajador Milos Alcalay.
No. Ambassador, to congratulate you for this outstanding meeting in Canada, and to thank the parliamentarians who have expressed the support for Venezuela. My question was oriented to the important presence of our country, our neighbor country from the hemisphere. It is oriented to 3 aspects. One, what Canada can, I'm speaking in English because Ben Roosevelt, our very distinguished ambassador, spoke in an excellent Spanish. My English is not so good. I would try to switch to French, which is a little bit better, due to the bilingual situation of Canada. But what can Canada do to support more the members of the Caribbean country as a Commonwealth major and outstanding country? And speaking of the Commonwealth, the presence of Canada in other countries where Canada is very, very strong, like in Africa, especially in Africa, and also in other regions, would have a bigger impact of the 60 countries that already are supporting us. That is the first. The second question to Canada would be of how can we prevent a very dangerous situation that we're having, not only for Venezuela, but for all the hemisphere, with the presence of Iran, the terrorist movement. The Treaty of Reciprocal Assistance, TIAR, Tratado Interamericano de asistencia recíproca, has monitored 4 important issues. We have spoken one of them, the human rights, which is very important, but also the question of terrorism, the question of narco trafficking, and the question of corruption. So I think that the characterization of the regime today in Venezuela is not only, of course, priority for the human rights, but we have to see how, together with Canada, we can stop this very dangerous situation for the hemisphere itself. And I think that, and finally, the presence of Canada, both in the United Nations, but also in the Organization of American States, which has already been very important, the support of OAS. But I think that we can, with countries, I was very happy to hear the representative of Colombia, who has been very clear in the vision, and the representative of Brazil. We have Ambassador Benandria, who is doing a very good work in Brazil. And this would be very important to have the support of the General Secretary, which have been of outstanding courage in the identifications of the situation of Latin America and of Venezuela. And the continuous support of Canada that we have received in the past will be more important, and especially with the other neighbor of Canada, I think that the United States is playing a very important role in Venezuela, and the action, of course, with the differences between Canada and the United States, but I think that in this moment, a very strong hemispheric position, Canada can play a substantial work. Merci pour votre attention et merci pour l'appui que le Canada a toujours donné à notre pays. Merci, Ambassador Orlando.
Thank you very much, Milos. I have to say thank you, Milos, especially as well, because Milos has been some kind of my special advisor since the first day that I became an ambassador. So Cheryl, many aspects that I just contain myself in order to be prudent and everything is because Milos say, Orlando, keep quiet, please, and acting as a diplomatic, okay? So thank you, Milos, which is one of my mentors. But now I would like to extend the word to Cheryl to answer Milos Alcalay, Ambassador Milos Alcalay, about his reflection. Go ahead. Abre el micrófono, por favor, Álvaro, a Cheryl.
Oh, hi, sorry, Orlando, sorry, could you repeat what you'd like me to speak to?
Yes, Ambassador Milos Alcalay just expressed some impression about Canada. So I don't know if you want to give him some answer about his impression and question.
Well, I would just say that, I mean, Canada is deeply committed, as we ever were. We definitely believe that we need to move forward in partnership, and you know, we need to do that by building the international community and building that coalition. So would you like, if you'd like me to go into something specific, maybe you could tell me which specific thing you would like me to drill down on.
No, I'm just looking that it's about the creation of the coalition, coalition in order to get it strong, strength, and try to move forward with Venezuela. We already know that negotiation and this kind of thing is very difficult to try, you know, to move forward and to step down a regime which is a criminal regime. So Canada is something that we have to learn about Canada. Canada is a diplomatic country which anytime is just insisting about the necessity to recover democracy and freedom in Venezuela under peaceful manner. We know that it's not easy, but it's a good example as a champion in human rights try to move forward. It is the idea in some way that Milos Alcalay tried to make his intervention as well. So now I don't know if another ambassador, Mauricio, or maybe Mauricio Street, I don't know if you want any kind of question or reflection as well, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup, Orlando. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this important activity. As you know, and everybody knows, Chile has been absolutely supporting Venezuela, and we will continue on that path. I think we are all aware that the situation is in our countries, unfortunately, have been forced to internal affairs due to the COVID-19. So we hope that we can go through that big problem, and we don't lose the pressure on the regime. Chile continues, and we will continue working on the Lima Group. So you can be sure, Orlando, and the Venezuelan people, that we are absolutely committed to the recovery of democracy in Venezuela. Thank you once again for inviting us, and we will continue supporting your country and your people.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. I have to add that Alejandro is one of the ambassadors here in Ottawa that always has been willing to have a meeting with the Lima Group in order to push harder and in order to put the agenda setting in relation with Venezuela. I would like to extend as well my welcome and my gratitude to the commissioner for the asset recovery of Javier Troconis, who is with us tonight here in the meeting as well. I don't want to maybe to say goodbye before just to extend the last word to Ambassador, maybe still here, Mauricio Ortiz. Mauricio, if you are here, I would love to hear you, because Mauricio, the ambassador from Costa Rica, is one of the ambassadors as well who give me a lot of support in Ottawa and a lot of solidarity with the Venezuelan cause of recovery of freedom and democracy. Mauricio is here, please go ahead. Okay, I noticed that maybe Mauricio already left Alvaro, right? Okay, so we are almost done. I'm just would like to express our expression of thankful and gratitude for all of you to come with us and to share this important meeting tonight. As I'm saying in the beginning of this meeting, unfortunately, it's not a precedent situation like this in Latin America and in Venezuela. The situation of devastation in Venezuela, the situation of violence, the situation of violence of human rights is a non-precedent situation. People in Venezuela is suffering. Our children, they are suffering. Our women, our people. People is dying in Venezuela with COVID-19. The regime is using the COVID-19 as a political instrument. The regime is using the COVID-19 to retain our people who is trying to return to Venezuela and manipulate the situation. The regime is looking to make an election, an assembly election in December, looking for just stem down our representation in the assembly under illegal manner. The regime is just a representation of a criminal organization that just kidnapped in Venezuela. And there is a non-precedent case in the history of Latin America. So we have to keep together. We have to promote the coalition in order to save Venezuelan people. We have to promote all the coalition, all the alliance that we could make in order to asking for universal justice. Justice is freedom. Justice is the representation of peace. We will not have peace without justice. And all of you, Venezuelan people, ambassador, all of you, our human rights fighters around the world, we need to build a final alliance in order to save Venezuela, because it's not just about Venezuela. It's about the region. It's about the impact that this situation is just causing in the rest of the region. We're not talking about just about the Venezuelan situation. It's a Somalization of the conflict in the whole continent. It's the impact of the displaced people, the highest level of displaced people in Latin America to Colombia, 1.8 million people in Colombia, 1.2 million people in Peru, 500,000 people in Chile, and the counting just keep going. It is an unprecedented situation. We need to keep together in order to push the international justice, the international criminal justice, to make an official investigation, a formal investigation against the regime. That could represent a totally change of the table of the Venezuelan situation. We are not to be afraid about R2P, responsibility to protect. It's a non-precedent situation. I know that under diplomatic manner, it's not easy to talk about R2P and intervention, humanitarian intervention, but Venezuela needed. Venezuela is undefended people, just trying to struggle with a criminal organization. It's not just a dictatorship. So that is my final reflection. We will keep struggling, fighting every day from justice and to justice. We are not conventional ambassadors. We are activists of freedom and peace. We know that it's not a war in Venezuela, or the statistics, they are worse than a war in Venezuela. The devastation of the economy is worse than a war. The devastation of the human rights is worse than a war. The execution, the disappearance, the persecution, the imprisonment, the statistic that Humberto Prado just mentioned, and the brave people of Venezuela resist. What we need to understand that just undefended people is not a justice fight against a criminal organization. And take the responsibility to talk under this manner, because we're suffering every day. Our children, our people in Venezuela dying because it's not water, it's not food, it's not medicine. What happened with COVID-19 is criminal. It's not transparency about what's going on in Venezuela. How the regime has no any kind of hesitation to use as a political instrument. So it's time to be a little bit more creative, even on the diplomatic basis. So finally, thank you. Thank you, Canada. Thank you, all of you. Thank you, Venezuelan people in Canada, all of you. Thank you, Venezuelan people in Venezuela. Thank you to our deputies. Thank you, ambassador, because I feel every day your support, and I receive it, and I transmit it to Venezuela. And I know, and I have the conviction, not the faith, the conviction that we're gonna make it. I'm gonna reach freedom. We're gonna reach justice, happiness, and love from Venezuela. Thank you very much. Have a good night, and keep fighting and struggling together for Venezuela. Thank you very much. Thank you, Alvaro. By the way, Alvaro, thank you to my people in the embassy. My passion, just forget.
Thank you. People. Thank you to our team.
Ricardo Romero, Alvaro, my team, Jessica, Sergio, who just, they are volunteers.
Yuska,
thank you for Gabi, everyone. My wife.
Everyone. Thank you so much. And thank you.
Who know me, so now I can talk anymore. Thank you very much. Keep fighting. I see you soon in freedom in Venezuela.
Solo quiero decirles una última cosa. Gloria al bravo pueblo.
Gracias.
Que va a seguir derribando yugos.
Gracias.
Dios te bendiga. Buenas noches.
Gracias, Cheryl.
Gracias.